And I'm joined now by one of Matt Gaetz' former colleagues, Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska. He's a member of the House Armed Services Committee. So thank you so much, Congressman, for being here. I want to start with your reaction to Matt Gaetz' withdrawing from consideration for Attorney General. Do you think that was the right decision for him to make?
Yes, he didn't have the votes. It was very clear to me. There were some senators publicly there, but I know a lot of other senators who talked to me privately. They weren't going to vote for him. You know, there was a lot of baggage, how he took down Kevin McCarthy. He was the leader of that effort, 8 of them out of 224 Republicans, and he had 8 people vote against him versus the vast majority who wanted to keep him. So that is a factor on why a lot of folks, probably held a grudge there. But secondly, there was this investigation on statutory rape was hanging over people's heads, and they're going to want to look at it. So I think you put the two things combined. He didn't have the votes. I wish him well, but he wasn't going to become Attorney General.
Yeah. Well, as you talk about that investigation that was hanging over everything, Matt Gaetz may no longer be running for Attorney General, but the House ethics report on him remains private. I asked Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey, a member of the House Ethics Committee, about whether it should be made public. Take a listen to what he told me.
Well, I think it contains information that the public should have, especially if he does decide to pursue additional office, whether it's the congressional seat, a Senate seat, a gubernatorial seat, a different kind of appointment to the Trump administration. I think the public should see that information.
So that's a Democrat on the House Ethics Committee saying that there should be a public place for this report to be seen because Matt Gaetz might seek public office another time or serve even in some high-level role in the administration. What do you think of that? Do you agree?
I somewhat agree. If he resigned out of the House and was not seeking the Attorney General or other positions of power in the federal government, I would say we should follow precedent and not release it because that is the precedent. However, when he was seeking the Attorney General spot, or it was possible he was going to come back to the 119th House, then I thought it should be released. So I think it's there, depending on what position he seeks the federal government, or if he does not, we keep it under wraps as we've normally done in our nation's history. The report's done, so it's available depending on what the future holds in store.
Yeah. That's one way to look at it, to basically say, well, we'll see what Matt Gaetz decides to do before that report. I also want to just ask you about the power dynamics in Washington. How sure can you be that Congress will be a check on Donald Trump's power if Republicans are not controlling both chambers of Congress in addition to the White House?
Well, we just proved that we are. The president's made a lot of good nominations. I'm a fan of Rubio. I'm a fan of Collins going to the VA. I think Stefanik will do a great job in the United Nations. Bergman within the within the Interior Department. But in this case, when it came to Matt Gaetz, the Senate made it clear they were not going to pass him. So I think we proved right there that we're not a blank check, that, we still have 3 branches of government. There are checks and balances. And in the end, we have to serve our constituents. And so I think the evidence is already there, just what you saw this past week. I think you'll see, very good hearings when it comes to the Pentagon's nominee, the DOD nominee. Also, when it comes to the National Intelligence Director, they may be able to pass, but I think they'll get a very good vetting and they'll have to prove themselves. So anyway, with the narrow majorities, I believe that both the House and the Senate will do what's right. We'll probably make sure we'll keep things within balance and that it won't be a rubber stamp for the executive branch.
Well, you bring up, of course, Pete Hegseth, who is someone that has, of course, been put up to be the defense secretary. Do you think he could work as the Pentagon chief?
I liked a lot of his views when I've listened to him. But right now, I would also, there's a few that I don't agree with. So, for example, he has mentioned he wants to hold accountable some of the senior generals in the Pentagon for some of the policy decisions that was made by the president or the Secretary of Defense. And, our military, and I served 30 years in the Air Force. I was retired as a 1-star. We take orders from the president and the Secretary of Defense. And the president is able to direct the direction of the military because he's the commander in chief or through his secretary. And so, the current president, Joe Biden, made some policies on DEI, made some policies on Afghanistan that a lot of Republicans didn't agree with. But don't blame the military leadership for those decisions. That's the responsibility of President Biden and Secretary Austin. So I would push back on our nominee here that don't blame our current chairman for decisions made by the President of the United States. I know CQ Brown. I served with him. I was a colonel with him. I was a one-star with him. And I served with the current Chief of Staff of the Air Force. We went to school twice together. These folks served the President and they served the Secretary of Defense. Don't take it out on them for what the civilian leadership did.
Yeah. Yeah. I also want to talk to you about foreign policy. And there's a worry by some that Donald Trump could side too much with Putin, with Russia, to end as quickly as possible the war in Ukraine. Do you worry about that?
Well, he's had some ambiguity where he stands with Russia and Ukraine. By the way, I pushed back on the current president because I thought he was very slow on providing weapons, put all these rules of engagement on him. Now he's changed that. And he's doing the right thing now, but we should have done it a year ago. I would like to hear from the future president some moral clarity. Who's at fault here? It's Russia. Russia is invading an independent neighbor. And why are they doing it? Well, they want to control Ukraine. They think Ukraine should be subordinate to them. They don't want to see democracy in Ukraine. They don't want to see free markets there. But they feel that way with a lot of other neighboring countries of Russia. Putin does, and the leadership. These are crimes against humanity that are being perpetrated against Ukrainian cities and and against Ukrainian women, and they're murdering prisoners. They got that on video. So we should have moral clarity, and we should also have clarity to know that if Ukraine falls, our strategic interests are undermined.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen next? Well, Putin's a bully. He's going to go after Moldova. He may go after the Baltics. He may go after Georgia. He won't stop with Ukraine. It's going to cost us a lot more if Ukraine does not prevail.
That's certainly a worry of a lot of people. I want to ask you about one other thing that's going on in Congress. One of your colleagues, Congresswoman Nancy Mace, introduced an anti-trans bathroom bill resolution that she says targets specifically transgender Congresswoman-elect Sarah McBride, who, of course, would be the first transgender member of Congress openly serving as an openly transgender person. Do you agree with that bill? Do you support that?
I haven't read her legislation, but I do agree with the Speaker's decision. He put some rules out this week. And I want to commend Sarah McBride for saying she accepted the rules and would abide by them. And I thought she handled herself in a professional way on this. So I think this has already been dealt with. The Speaker's made a decision.
But do you support the legislation?
Sarah McBride has said she will support it. Pardon me?
Do you support the legislation, though?
Well, I have not read it, but I support the Speaker's to say the Speaker came out with a rule that basically lays out where a transgender woman can go. There's unisex bathrooms, for example. He put out a rule, and Sarah McBride accepted it. And I think this issue's behind us now.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tom Bacon. We appreciate it, Congressman, for you coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.